If you want to participate, contact me at ordinarywomenpodcast@gmail.com. I'm sure you have great projects to brag about. You can also follow me and message me on Instagram at ordinarywomenpodcast, on Twitter at ordinarywomenpc, or on Facebook on the page Ordinary Women. Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Ordinary Women. I'm welcoming Lucie today. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Lucie. Great to speak to you. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fine too, thank you. I'm really excited for some reason to have someone who has the same name as me on this podcast.
And the same spelling. It's quite rare.
Completely. Can you start by giving us a quick introduction of yourself, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Lucie Pierredon. I'm half English, half French, hence the confusing name and accent. I am 36 and I live in Ireland, in Bray, which is near Dublin. And for my work, I am a vice president of revenue development for a scale-up marketing data hub company called Funnel.
That sounds so great. Thank you for this. And is there anything unusual about you?
Unusual. As I said, I'm half English, half French, so that's something that really is foundational for for my character and my background. I guess the kind of fun fact I tend to share is that I really love baking, so I made my own 3-tier wedding cake, which was, probably not the best idea when it comes to stress management before your wedding, but it was definitely an achievement that I feel really proud of.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was going to say, like, on your wedding, you must, I was going to say, I've never been married, which is true. I've never been married. It's just a really fun way to say that. But yeah, everyone is saying that. It's like, yeah, really stressful. But also, that's so great. That must have been such a great memory, though.
It's fun. Yeah, it's really fun. And we've got some funny stories we like to laugh about with some of panic moments. But yeah, it is. It's a great memory to have and something really nice to have that personal touch. So, yeah.
Yeah. And at least if you want to make it again for, I don't know, your 10 years anniversary or whenever, you can do
I'm
it
not sure
because you
my
know you've
marriage
done
would
it.
survive that. It could be a good challenge.
Do you want to make that cake again?
Yeah, it was good. It was a very nice cake. So who knows? Maybe if I have some time.
That's so great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Obviously, on this podcast, we talk a lot about what it's like to be a woman. So I'd like to start by asking, was there a moment or an event in your life when you realized that you are a woman?
I've been thinking about this one, and I'm going to have to be honest and say no. But something I
Mm.
do remember from very young is the determination to not let societal norms get in the way of me doing what I wanted. So I actively always pushed back against like what girls should do, or like, oh, you're just a girl, you can't do that. So for me, that was always a real driving force of like, I've totally refused to be limited by some of the traditional norms that we might have. So, for example, I joined the Army cadets in my mid-teens, mainly just because I wanted to prove that I could. So that for me is a very strong memory, was absolutely refusing to be limited by the fact that I was a girl or a woman.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Do you think that you did things that were not you just to prove a point sometimes?
Aha. So interestingly enough, I think that it definitely has been a kind of gut reaction I've had throughout my life. And I've got this need to prove that I can do something. And I have realized as I've grown more mature that sometimes it's made me do something just because it was there, not because I actually wanted to do it. So yeah, it's a very perceptive question.
Yeah, it really makes me think of them like not like the other girls narrative, which I think a lot of women have and we don't necessarily realize. I mean, I definitely was like that growing up, like, oh, I'm not like the other girls, without realizing that it's just internalized misogyny.
Mm.
Um, and then like, yeah, how do you build your own identity? And also like, but at the same time, what does it even mean? Like, there's so many layers on that. Like,
Mm.
because as you were saying, it's also like, if you were a girl and doing that, then I don't know how to explain what I want to say.
Yeah, I see what you
Like,
mean, right? On the one hand, it
yeah.
could be like pushing back against what being a woman represents, and that could be, as you
Mm,
said, internalized misogyny. On the other hand, you could see it as expanding what people see girls are capable of doing. So it's a really fine line that we actually all walk all the time.
yeah.
And I see it a lot in some people in my entourage who, have trouble with the word feminist. Oh, I'm not feminist, because they don't want to be seen as,
Mm,
I don't know, angry or rebellious. But then you can equally see feminism as just trying to give everybody more freedom to be themselves and fewer restrictions. And that is the very interesting balancing act that anybody interested in gender dynamics has to always be aware of.
yeah, completely. And yeah, I really like that. Yeah, having the choice. I remember seeing these women who were saying, I'm not feminist because, and it was always reasons like things like, oh, I'm not feminist because I like cooking for my husband. And it's really sad that, I mean, it shows how little they understand of that concept. And that no one is gonna prove, like, if you love cooking and if you love cooking for people you love, that's super cool. Like, that's amazing. That's an amazing, like, feeding other people
Mm.
is so much like showing how much you care, and sharing food and things like that. But yeah, it's such a fine line, and also like also how much it's been used by people who have no interest in feminism. So like
Mm.
men who would lose privileges using all these narratives to kind of be like, oh boo, feminists are mean. When it's like we just want the right to live currently. Like, yeah.
That would be nice. Yes.
Yeah, like just yeah, pay us equally and stop killing us because we're women. Yeah, and let us cook for our husband if we want to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think cooking is a great escape. I find it really kind of meditative because you kind of really concentrate on what you're doing, and it's wonderful to have a real product, something physical at the end of it. So yeah, it doesn't need to be gendered. I agree.
Completely. Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'd like to know if you grew up with any women role model.
This is a funny one again. Your questions really made me think. Um, I can't remember at any time wanting to necessarily be someone else or be like someone else. I do remember, however, always really liking stories of people who are breaking the mold, doing things a bit differently. So, as I said, I joined the Army Cadets, and a film that really impacted me was G.I. Jane. The idea of doing what people don't expect you to do. As I've grown older, I absolutely adored the writings of Maya Angelou. And I think that rather than role models, I think it's really nice to see people who show you that we don't need to be limited. We can, each of us, achieve what we set our mind to, and our station in life, our gender, etc., doesn't have to limit us. So I think that is more inspiring rather than a specific person in and of themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I really like this. And what about today?
I think what I've really found inspirational is women who help women. Okay, so I
Hmm.
have had some really amazing leaders within my career who have given me the opportunity to grow. So that has been something that I found really interesting, and it's something I find a great responsibility now myself as a female leader, especially in the sales environment, which can be traditionally seen as male dominated. Wonderfully, that is changing now, but I find it a great responsibility and something I take very seriously, making sure that we do have good gender balance and diversity in general within the teams that I lead, and helping women and girls to see that they do have many, many different options, and that a role that might be traditionally seen as male or having male characteristics, actually you can be extremely successful in it whilst embracing all of your femininity.
Yeah, that is so important. And that's so cool that, yeah, you have people like that around and that you're also, so like, yeah, you are also, I'm sure, that type of inspiration for other people. Yeah, that's really cool. And do you think that the lack of representation of women in society had an impact on you?
I don't think so. Not necessarily. Again, because I was always trying to kind of break the mold. For me, it was more a fire than a limitation. You know, if I saw that there
Mm.
wasn't necessarily women somewhere, I'd be like, right, I'm going to go and put a woman there. So I always found it more as a challenge than as an obstacle. But I think that now, as a mother, I have two young children. You become super aware of the lack of female representation. You know, small things, silly things like in storybooks where all of the characters are male, or especially if they're animals and all of them are male. And it's like, well, why?
Mm.
You know, a giraffe can be a girl giraffe and a boy giraffe. Like, it doesn't have to always be boy giraffes. So that's something that I'm super aware of now, and that I do try to make sure that I expose my children to all sorts of different personality styles for each gender. That is something that I'm very aware of now.
Yeah, I can imagine. I guess at this point, because your children are quite young, aren't they?
Yes, 2 and
So
5.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah. It's yeah, ages where it will really shape also what they think of the words. It's so funny. I follow this person on Instagram. She just had a baby, and so she was talking about that actually quite recently. And actually quite a few people, I don't know if you do that too, but when their children are still too young to read, or that, like, even if they're not, but when the parents read to the children, they would sometimes actually
Mhm.
alter, modify, sorry, modify the story to include more things, which I think is like, yeah, great, but also as a parent, you must have already 10,000 things to do in like no time and no energy. Yeah,
It's funny because I absolutely do that. I didn't know if
really,
I
that's
it's actually
great.
really funny to hear that that's something that other people do. Yeah, there's this really sweet little book about a child who writes to the zoo to ask them for a pet, and
Mm.
all of the animals in this book are male animals. And so, yeah, what I do is I make, I just basically alternated so that one of them was male and the next one was female and then male and then female. And I know that my parents think I'm a bit of a lunatic for doing that, but I think it's so easy to make these tiny, tiny changes that they'll never realize. That just makes them internalize misogyny just a tiny bit less. But then, you
Yeah,
do that, and then the next day your son turns around and tells you that only men can drive trains, and so you do wonder how successful you're being.
no, completely. That is, yeah, definitely so interesting. And like, I mean, I studied languages, so I'm like so passionate about that. And yeah, I mean, it's been proven, right, that these things have an impact on then the way you think and all of this. So definitely, even though you would think that it's super tiny, but I guess it's just like adding to the rest, it actually is so big. Yeah.
We have to do what we can, step by step.
Yeah. Do you realize, I don't know, do you notice some things like that in your children in the way they speak?
What do you mean?
Like, I don't know, like a tendency to, I don't know, maybe like when they play to only make up main, like boys or girls characters or things like that. Like having a gendered vision of the word maybe when they play or.
Well, like I said, my son, despite being the son of a ardent feminist, has come out with the most incredibly sexist things. So yes, I absolutely do see it. My
Yeah.
daughter is still super young, so I don't think I see anything there. But it's actually really funny because when I had my babies, I was really determined not to put them into a box. But it's astounding. It really is astounding how my son was immediately obsessed with machines and anything with wheels and trucks and stuff. And my daughter just loves her teddies. And I bought my son a little pushchair with a little baby in it when he was about 2. And he, was there and he would maybe take it out for a walk every like 6 months. My daughter loves it. She's using it on a daily basis. It's quite astounding to see the innate
Mm.
development and the differences that you can see within children. A very, very interesting part of the whole gender studies dynamic. And I actually think it's really important. We were talking earlier about, do you reject your gender norms or do you embrace them? And I think this is where we have to realize that there are gender, like, how to say, kind of like those stereotypes almost exist for a reason, but that's not a reason to
Mm.
reject them. It's to embrace that everybody can have varying amounts of these different traits, and all of them are equally valid. The problem with misogyny or sexism is that it has devalued traits that are traditionally feminine. And that's where the problem is. We should be valuing all of the traits with all of the genders equally. And that's when everybody can be themselves and be happy.
Yeah, and it's quite funny because, like, I feel that, I mean, I don't know, because I don't particularly remember when I was a child, and I'm not around children that much, not gonna lie. But I feel that from what I see, it's really like there is, yeah, very much that devalorization in picking up a doll for a man, whereas if a little girl was gonna play with the train, it would not be
Absolutely.
devalorized.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. In conclusion, I think what you said was very smart. Also, I've definitely seen in gender studies and things like that how important also it is to build your identity. Like, we know that belonging to a community and like having a group is really important, builds your identity, etc. And so I wonder, like, it's again a very fine line for sure. Like, how do you make sure that you don't build a very, I was going to say, a very gendered experience? Like, how do you navigate that basically? Like, how do you provide the tools for your kid to make sure that they are included in a community, in a group? If they are, a girl, identify as a girl. It's a very fine line, and at the same time not push any of the constructs on them, making sure they know that they have to be comfortable, they can be comfortable with who they are.
I think
Yeah.
the really important thing is avoiding falling into some traps. So, for example, you could, if a little boy is playing with a little girl, somehow, for some silly reason, it's very easy to be like, oh, is she your girlfriend? And that's just so silly
Mm.
because that shows, it brings in all of these completely inappropriate relationship
Yeah.
dynamics. Whereas, so that's the kind of thing that I'm really careful about. And I think that can be really important, like not emphasizing difference. So, really making sure that you're not introducing barriers to them creating a group that they feel comfortable in. For me, that's really key. And equally, very tiny things. My son needed new welly boots. I showed him the website for all the different wellies he could have. There was all the colors under the sun, and he wanted the hot pink ones, and so he got the hot pink ones. These are the types of things where we can completely remove any stigma or gendered approach to these things. And I think it's in these tiny, it is small, it's not going to change society tomorrow, but we can make individuals more comfortable, and that will in the long term make a difference.
Yeah, completely. That is so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I'd like to jump on kind of the second part of this podcast and talk about a project, achievement, life experience that you did or are doing and of which you're proud. So what do you want to talk to us about today?
The project that I wanted to talk about today is a project that I led, which was to implement a group called Connecting Women in Technology in my last company, which was Salesforce here in Ireland. Connecting Women in Technology is a really great organization aiming to do just that, connect women in technology, and very specifically to encourage girls and women to enter the STEM industries and to consider STEM as a topic in school to study and a career in the future. It's something that I think is really important. As I said, I'm in a career which has historically been more male oriented. And so for me, it was a project I'm really proud of having managed to achieve.
Yeah, that's super cool. So why did you start it?
I was lucky enough to have been asked to join the Connecting Women in Technology, or CWIT for short, steering committee at LinkedIn, which is where I was working before Salesforce. And I joined as the kind of secretary of the group. So it gave me the most amazing exposure to female leaders in the company. And then when I moved to Salesforce, I had assumed that Salesforce would already be part of this organization because Salesforce is obviously a SaaS leading company. It's a company that cares deeply about things such as equality and diversity.
Mm.
So when I joined, I was like, oh, I want to join this committee, and found out that it wasn't even there. So that's why I decided to take it upon myself and get CWIT or get approval for us to join CWIT at Salesforce in Ireland.
That's so cool. So how did you do it? Because Salesforce as well is massive. I mean, like, I guess that even just the Ireland branch must be so big.
Yeah.
How did you do it?
So first of all, I did wait. I waited until I had settled in, until I felt comfortable with my
Mm.
role, because taking on a project like this, you've got to make sure you've got the bandwidth for it, and obviously your day job comes first. So I think
Yeah.
it took me about a year or so before I started on the project properly. Then how did I go about it? I went to our HR team and our people partners, and I asked them, was there anything like this? It turned out that I needed to talk to some of the HR leaders out in the US. So that was really interesting. Now, as you say, it's such a huge, huge company, navigating all of the different departments to identify who I needed to speak to about this. So that took a couple of months. But the great thing was there was really good support. So I knew that I had the support from my manager, from the leadership in Ireland, to go and find out more. So that took a couple of months. I finally got in contact with the right person internally, who asked us to do some research and to make sure that there wasn't anything already existing that could basically achieve what we were hoping to achieve with CWIT. So it was great to have that, because it's always good when you have an idea and you get excited about it and you want to steam ahead, but it's nice when somebody says, okay, let's make sure that this is the best way to achieve what we're hoping to achieve. So that made us really consider what we were doing, and to find out more about what other offices in Europe were doing and what other people within the Irish office were working on. So that was a really interesting way to kick things off. And then once we had realized that actually this was unique and this could fit very well in alongside some of our existing initiatives, we had to find an internal sponsor. The internal sponsor was our head of HR for Ireland, a lady named Terry Maloney, who was really supportive and very encouraging. So she agreed to be our internal sponsor. And then the next step was to present to the leadership team for Dublin. And Dublin is our EMEA headquarters for Salesforce. So it was definitely fairly intimidating.
Yeah, I can imagine so. That's so cool that also You mentioned that they were like, okay, is that the best way we can say that we can do this? Never like, oh, but that's not. I mean, I guess that kind of like goes with what I've heard of Salesforce as a company, especially on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But like, yeah, no mention of like, do we really want to do that? Like, don't you have other work to do? But rather, they're like, that's a great idea. How do we do it great? How do we do it at best? Yeah, and also yeah, talking with all like every time I felt like you have an idea what you were saying, like yeah, you kind of get like super excited and like, oh my God, I'm going to do this and this and that, and blah blah blah. And then talking with other people is also a great way to yeah, kind of like have a reality check and usually improve and yeah, double check things that you were thinking, but also things that you didn't think about. Yeah, that's so super cool. So you talked about how it was intimidating to speak with the leadership team. How can you tell us more and like how did it go and how did you like manage that like kind of intimidation?
So the good thing was I wasn't presenting on my own. I had, by this time, I had included a few people who had expressed some interest in the project. We had I think this was before Slack, but we had an internal group where I scoped out if people would be interested, and so I had already a little team behind me. So I went and presented with someone else. So it's always nice to team up for that. But also, I saw it as a great opportunity. That's the beauty of taking on a project like this. It gets you exposure that you would never get in your everyday role. And it really pushes you outside of your comfort zone and you really grow as an individual, as a professional. So I always try to look at things in the positive way. And that's the way I kind of controlled the nerves and also controlled any imposter syndrome. I said to myself, this is just a really great opportunity to learn and to grow. And I took it that way.
Yeah, for sure. And it also goes with how you described these people you were working with. It sounds like no one at that point would be like, ew, what are you doing?
Absolutely.
But rather than everyone would be like, oh, cool, okay.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely felt like I had a lot of support, which is always great for confidence.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think it helped you with your career and like how you progressed there?
That's interesting. I definitely think that having been part of the committee at LinkedIn was because I was an individual contributor at LinkedIn and I joined Salesforce as a manager. So that was a great step in my career. And I think having been part of a project like CWIT at LinkedIn, it was wonderful for me to show that I'm the type of person who does go above and beyond. It enabled me to show leadership. So yes, being in a project like this, it definitely helps you because, as I said, it exposes you to people you would never usually get exposure to. You get to stretch certain skills such as leadership, stakeholder management, presentation skills, networking. So absolutely, there's very little downside to taking on a project like this.
Yeah, that's super cool. How did it go with your like day-to-day work? Did you talk with your manager? Was it like included within your working time?
Yeah, absolutely. So Salesforce has this great initiative called 111, where the company gives 1% of employee time, 1% of profit, and 1% of basically product to charity. And so every employee is encouraged to do some type of charity work during their work time. So for me, it's a question of time management, but yes, it was all of this was done within my working hours.
That's so cool that they're doing that. Because I often hear as well people saying, which I think is really true, especially young women starting at companies are all kind of often assigned kind of like the team bonding activities, doing like party, blah, 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 which is on the one hand, like it's, yeah, kind of good for networking. You can definitely add that to your CV. However, it's also like it won't help you that much, or like to an extent it can with networking stuff, but it's not part of your work. So like either you take the time you could use to work and make your career progress, or you take your alone time, like not working time. And either way, it's not great. It's so like Salesforce for that. They seem really great.
is definitely something that they care deeply about. And I think it's really positive that this idea
Yeah.
that I think encouraging good time management it's such a skill because
Yeah.
very often our day job can take up every single minute of the day, but actually a lot of that is inefficiency, and learning to manage your time well, any employer worth their salt is going to want you to learn and grow and get better because then you're going to do a better job. So I've always encouraged anyone I'm working with to have at least 1 hour a week that they would dedicate to either learning and development or career development. And that should definitely be possible. I see very, very few reasons why you couldn't, out of 40 hours in a week, take one for your own development. And that's very much the way I approached this. It was something that I made sure, as I said, my day job was always under control, but I planned and I made sure that this time that I needed for the business case for CWIT, and then once it was launched for the running of the group, I made sure that that was planned, and I made sure that it was achievable alongside my normal duties.
Yeah, that's like definitely couldn't agree more. And like if you're running a company where you don't have that like flexibility that people don't have an hour a week, it's probably really bad. Like if you expect everyone to be like really full on for like it's not happening ever. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how long did it take you, like from when you first were like, oh, I want to join that, discovered that it wasn't there, and when Salesforce joined, see what?
Whew, I actually can't remember, but easily 6 months. Because that,
Right.
as I said, it's a big company and there was a lot
Mm.
of hoops to jump through. But what was great was, as I said, at every step, I felt like there was a lot of support. And once we got the approval, then we were able to really run with it. And so what happened was, as I said, I presented with my colleague to the leadership committee, and they were extremely positive about it, and we got approval there and then. So then I was free to go and implement. So I contacted I had already been working with the women and leaders at CWIT to help me, guide me on how to present this to leadership, etc. So I was able then to contact them, and we got things rolling. Now we were extremely unlucky in that by the time we got approval, COVID hit. So
Oh,
one of the
right.
beauties of CWIT is that it allows you to network in person with people from other companies. Unfortunately, that didn't quite happen. But again, it was really interesting to go through that challenge. And what we did is we really pivoted. So very quickly after getting involved, some of my colleagues at Salesforce had this great idea for a kind of summer series of webinars where we would have webinars on all sorts of different topics to do with women in technology. And it ended up becoming a CWIT wide initiative with speakers from all sorts of different companies, and in fact, even getting involvement with universities. So that was a really brilliant example of how sometimes I think with COVID, we really had to pivot and learn that things that could be done in person were sometimes more complicated because of the in-person element. Whereas the beauty of online is everybody could just connect from wherever they were, and it enabled us to have a really quick turnaround on an idea like that.
Yeah, definitely. I felt that, yeah, I mean, as you just said, in a way, COVID, like in the one thing it was good for, if I can say that, or like one of the thing it enabled was, yeah, it's being able to speak with like facilitating that thing of like speaking with anyone, everywhere, anywhere. It's yeah, and it's so cool and important as well. And do you think anyone had an impact on this, on like yeah, helping you or like yeah, helping you do it?
Well, definitely having leadership buy-in was key because it really gave
Mm.
me and the whole team the confidence to push it through. Also, I had great support from a colleague called Galadriel Heinrich, who was leading the Women at Salesforce group at that time. And obviously, CWIT was really like fitting very comfortably alongside women at Salesforce. So I had a lot of support from Galadriel, and that was really brilliant to have that. So Galadriel, Tony, who I said was our executive sponsor, and then my manager, Angela Calvagno, was absolutely brilliant in, always giving me the space and the support to keep pushing through. And last but not least, the women who decided to become part of CWIT at Salesforce, it was brilliant to see how much appetite there was for this. So there was a lot of support, many influential people.
That's amazing. Yeah. And also, I think it's always a very good sign and even more reassuring, even when you know it's a good idea. The fact that there's so many people behind is like, oh, wow. Yeah, it is actually like important. Mm-hmm. That is so cool. And what challenges have you faced?
So one of the biggest challenge was actually when I went on maternity leave. So after about a year of having CWIT implemented in Salesforce, I got pregnant. I went on maternity leave with my second pregnancy. And I think that was a real challenge, because very often with a project like this, if you have one person who's quite passionate and who's driving the project forward, there can be a bit of a void when that person leaves. So I took a year off for my second maternity leave. And when I came back, things had definitely fizzled a little bit. And again, it was smack bang in COVID. So that was really, I think, a big challenge. So that was definitely a big blocker.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, which is also really interesting that it happened while you were creating something for women and were in that group. A lot of other women probably have faced this type of challenge as well.
Yeah, it's definitely something where, going on maternity leave, it's vital and it's a wonderful thing, but it can also be a challenge, right? When you're pushing something through and you've got some momentum, and then all of a sudden you leave and there's a complete break. That can definitely be a challenge, and some people can find it very difficult to make that cut.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, definitely. And was there anything on the contrary that was easier than you thought would be?
I guess navigating the size of Salesforce was, although it took some time, it wasn't actually difficult. And so that was definitely a nice surprise, to know that basically asking for help, right? And saying, who do I need to speak to? Can you introduce me? That really made things a lot easier than it could have been. So I think that was a good thing, to kind of not dissuade yourself from the beginning, and to give it a go. And as I said, ask for help. And very often I find things get a bit easier when you do that.
Yeah, definitely. Always easier to do things with other people and having support. And why are you proud of this?
I'm proud of it for a few reasons. I mean, first of all, I really believe in, as I said, women helping other women. I really believe in the work that CWIT is doing and its objectives of encouraging women and girls into STEM careers. So I think any way that we can do to achieve that goal is really important. Secondly, I'm proud of it because it was a pretty big project and it took quite a long time, but I achieved that goal, and out of it came a really great initiative that, was actually, as I said, shared out throughout the whole of the CWIT network in Ireland. So that was brilliant. And I guess what's really important is showing people the way, right? Showing people that these things are possible. I think it's very easy, especially in larger companies. Now I'm in a much smaller company, and there's a great focus on individuals having an impact. But when you're part of a 20,000 person company, that it can feel quite daunting. So I think that the reason why I really wanted to talk about it is to encourage anybody who's listening to the podcast, or I always want to encourage any young person to not let themselves be dissuaded or scared off. Try something, have a go, and you'll generally find that you can achieve much, much more than you initially thought.
I love this. And I think we're going to conclude our episode on this note. Thank you so, so much for sharing all of this. Yeah, it was so interesting, and I hope it inspired other people to do things too. Is there anything that we haven't talked about during our discussion that you wanted to say before we conclude?
Honestly, it's we got really deep really fast, so I feel like we've had some really good discussions. As I said, the thing that I think is really important is to believe in yourself and to give things a go, because we often limit ourselves and we often tell ourselves, I might not be able to do that. And as women, there's lots of data showing that, women will only apply for a job if they fulfill 100% of the criteria, whereas men would apply for a job on average if they fulfilled maybe 60% of the criteria. So for me, the really important thing is believe in yourself, believe that you can learn as you're doing something and you don't have to be perfect. And that is such an important message that so many women and young girls need to hear, because there's such a heavy expectation placed on us. So believe in yourself and you can achieve many great things.
I love that. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so, so much for reminding us all of this. And thanks again for your time and sharing all of this with me and everyone who's listening.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Lucie.
Thank you. And there is a tradition in this podcast that the guest gets the very last word. So the mic is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you for listening.